Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world. Welcome to APAMEI's monthly forum. And we are happy to have with us and a person who has been with us from the very beginning of this organization, and he will be properly introduced to us later. In the early decades of the 21st century, education has turned towards cosmopolitanism in light of increasingly globalized relationships and responsibilities. And this cosmopolitan perspective in education has helped us achieve acceptance, tolerance, and interconnectedness. Today, we will look into cosmopolitan perspective on ethics and communication, the capacity to communicate across differences and to be able to understand and learn more about common values and ethical concerns. And we are indeed so honored to have as our speaker and lecturer someone who walks and talks, and I would say breathes cosmopolitanism. He will be properly introduced to us later, but let me just say this to him. You have seen the Asia Pacific Association of Methodist-related educational institutions walk in and on its shadow. And it is because we are standing on his light. And for that, we are truly grateful to you, our speaker. And without further ado, may I call in the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Regional Hub and the General Secretary of APAMEI, Dr. Yang Min Pei, to do the honors of introducing our lecturer and speaker.
Thank you, President Miranda, and thanks for the nice presentation. And also, I'm very thrilled, to introduce our speaker today, and who is Dr. Amos Nascimento. And he has been the good friend and also advisor and kind of, moving force, for our global education. He has a lot of background to introduce and also a lot of work we need to discuss. But let me shorten as much as possible because I don't want to take up any time of his speech. But, it will be still long, okay, because he is handling a lot of things, for us. Let me start with, he has been the Associate General Secretary, for General Education, Global Education and New Initiative in Global General Board of Higher Education and Ministry of United Methodist Church. He worked that way, that means, he is the top administrator of the global education of the Methodist Church. They are restructuring, their system right now. So he is in a position now as a global officer for the whole agency. And also he is the chair of the education committee of the World Methodist Council. And also he is the executive secretary and the treasurer of International Association of Methodist Religious School, College, and University. Academically, he is also the professor of philosophy and principal investigator of the University of Washington. And also he is the fellow and the advisor and the visiting professor, in Germany, in the University of Frankfurt, and in Cambridge, and in Brazil too. So his research focused mainly on the human rights and environmental ethics of the University of Washington in Seattle, Tacoma. He is the native of Brazil, but he studied, in Brazil, something a lot of people do not know. He studied music in the beginning, and also theology and social science and philosophy, okay, with a lot of famous liberation theologians in Argentina and Brazil and USA. And he moved to Germany, and he studied under the very famous philosopher, maybe I'm gonna name only one, the Jürgen Habermas. So he is the student of the Jürgen Habermas. So he got the PhD in the philosophy in the University of Frankfurt under Habermas. And also he has taught there and also Methodist University in Sao Paulo and University of Washington too. He has published numerous books and edited a lot of books and articles. And simply, Dr. Nascimento is the leading educator in the global Wesleyan, Methodist, and United connection of global education. So I'm very thrilled to announce, him, to as our speaker today. And he is kind of top person, we are following. So I hope, we can get his wisdom and his vision for this global education. Read his lecture on cosmopolitan perspective on ethics and communication. So let us give our hands, to our speaker, Amos Nascimento. Thank you. Amos, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Youngmin Pak, for this introduction, your kind words. I greet our President, Flor Miranda, Bishop Nakpil, as well as the other officers of the Asia-Pacific Association of Methodist Educational Institutions, Dr. Shew, Dr. Nirja Masi. Thank you very much for this invitation, the opportunity to establish a conversation with you on important topics that we all share, we all pursue and work together in our respective positions and contexts. I prepare a lecture for maybe 20, 30 minutes, and then we can discuss about it. I also have, I don't know if, would the PowerPoint be helpful, Young Ming? If so, I will need to share, if you allow me to share my screen, I will then share some PowerPoints as well so people can follow along. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those who are now here watching us this moment. Again, I appreciate the invitation, and I hope we can have some interesting discussions and reflection. I'd like to start with a quick, very little tweak on the title. I'm going to add one extra word. I'll talk about cosmopolitan perspectives on ethics, communication, and I'd like to add health, because we're dealing with the post-pandemic world, and public health is one of the issues we're trying to address. And just my background, I come from different contexts, and I try to talk about cosmopolitanism, bringing those things together. And my concern is that sometimes we focus in one particular perspective and don't see the globe. As a matter of fact, there are many, there's a big trend today where some people say my country first, or my perspective first, my religious or my culture first. And they don't realize that actually we live in a global village and that we share many things. But we were reminded of our global connections by this terrible pandemic, because it is a global event. It affects us all independently of our context, including in Japan, Korea, China, the Philippines, where sometimes we also may have a tendency of thinking that we are alone, isolated, or only our local issues matter. I'm not an expert what is going on in our country, but I'll try to address this from a global perspective of cosmopolitanism. And cosmopolitanism tries to address issues that, we can call ethnocentrism in general. We focus on this exclusive center of rights. We develop a linear historical account that starts with us and ends with us. We do not consider that we're part of plural contexts. We just look at our perspective. We disregard broader systemic conditions, including in case of climate change, which, if something happens in Africa may have an impact in India, and something that happens in Japan could impact the United States, and so on. We also do not tend to listen to the voices of people who are minorities in their respective places, and therefore don't have a loud voice. And by doing all this, we perpetuate our biases and stereotypes. And when I say ethnocentrism, it could be an Afrocentrism, when you center in Africa, or Eurocentrism. We talk a lot about Eurocentrism, but we don't talk about US centrism, when we think the United States is the center of the universe, or even Sinocentrism, when we may be thinking that China might be the center. So what I'd like to propose today is what I call a plurality of views that help us understand this predicament. Let me just read a couple of things while we're still there. I'll be talking about the Axial Age in a minute, but before that, bear with me, please. I wanted to discuss, as I mentioned before, the cosmopolitan perspectives on ethics, communication, and health. And I want to start with the Axial Age because this is a concept used by Karl Jaspers to help us decenter these ethnocentric perspectives, be it Eurocentric, US-centric, Afrocentric, Sinocentric, you name it. They are exclusivist views of globalization because they suggested they are the center. But Karl Jaspers, with this idea of axial age, he said that there was a simultaneous development or a co-original process in which different civilizations emerged. And I quote, he says, during the period around 500 BC, in the spiritual process that occurred between 800 and 200 BC, was a time of when a common framework for the historic self-understanding of humans evolved. And then he notes that you could see a development here in Persia, in India, in parts of Mesopotamia, in China, in Greece, and he doesn't say much about it, but I would like to include in Africa and in the Americas. So he says, at the same time, all these civilizations, almost 205,000 years ago, are emerging independently and with equal value in a very similar process. Interesting enough, much later, we have what we call, Schemel Eisenstadt calls the multiple modernities. So you fast forward 2,000 years later, around the 1700s, 1600s, and you observe that the same places where we had those axial civilizations emerging between 800 and 200 BCE, 2,000 years later, you see modernities emerging in each one of those places also in an independent and codependent way. So contrary to the idea that modernity is an exclusive European phenomenon, and based on this plurality of perspectives of the axial age, we can recognize that there's plurality in this process. There are many expressions and perspectives. For example, let's talk about even in Europe. When we talk about this modernity emerging in Europe, we have to recognize they had different names in different places. For example, in Italy, they called it Illuminismo. In Scottish, in England, the Enlightenment. In Holland, Verlichten. German, Aufklärung. So even in those places, Europe, China, Africa, they're not monoliths. There's plurality within these contexts as well. And the same you can see in the Americas. The revolution and Declaration of Independence in the United States in 1776, the first post-colonial country, but also the rebellion that happened in Haiti in 1791. All these are expressions of modernity. And the point I'm trying to make here is that they are plural and they happen in several parts of the world. And I just would like to add one more point before we move on, is that Methodist education, the endeavor in which we're all involved in our institutions in the Philippines, in India, in Japan, in South Korea, in Taiwan, but also in other parts of the world, in Africa, in Europe, in Latin America, and so on, it emerges in this modern plural process. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, he matriculated at the University of Oxford in 1720, so 300 years ago. He founded Kingswood School, the first Methodist school, in 1748. And he also went to the United States, and in 1766, this movement became official in the United States. And in 1784, the Methodist Episcopal Church emerged. And out of the missionary work, today, Methodist education is embedded in many contexts, such as Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe and Eurasia, Latin America and the Caribbean, and North America. So what you can see is that we are part of this global process, and we're part of this plurality that affect us in different ways. But it's important to see that sometimes we disregard Africa or disregard other places, but we're all together in this development. Let me just show you very quickly, hopefully you can see here in this map, the great civilizations that Karl Jaspers at that time was presenting. You can see that they're centered here more in Mesopotamia, in East and Southeast Asia, as well as in Southern Europe. But as I mentioned, we disregard Africa, we disregard the Americas, and I want to include developments happened in those places, so they are part of this globalization process as well. Now, with this, I just mentioned this conceptual reassessments. We not only talk about the plurality of multiple modernities, this is a term coined by Shmuel Eisenstadt, but also sometimes some people talk about the clash of civilizations, that the empire of China goes against the empire of the United States, who is against the empire of Russia, who now is in tension with the empire of India. Some people are trying to say, yes, there is plurality, but this plurality is not related to cooperation, but to conflict. That's not a possibility. But more recently, some people like Charles Taylor, Robert Bellah, and many others like Nila Bhattacharya, they propose the idea of possible cooperation, multicultural, intercultural understanding, and plural understanding of this global world. Well, this gives me an opportunity then to talk about what do I mean by global? Because recently, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, many countries, especially those regions and countries I just mentioned, we see emerging Russia as a powerful, United States, China, India, Brazil, England. In those countries, they just resorted back to that idea, me first. Let's get away with this idea of global cooperation, global and plural integration, to let's focus on nationalism. You saw this with Donald J. Trump, with Bolsonaro, with Boris Johnson, with Modi, with Putin and many others in different places, affirming that this whole idea of global agenda is past. We're not bound by those commitments anymore. And this led to many questions. Whenever we start talking about global issues, some people they follow these leaders and they start asking questions. They say, are we really global? Is a global perspective really helpful? When we talk about human rights and they are universal, are there universal human rights? Or do we have any responsibility towards other people beyond our own nations or cultures or religions? Should we educate with a global perspective? Should we express our solidarity with peoples I've never met? They're situated in a different part of the world. I don't live there. I don't care. So those questions began to emerge, and that whole idea of global connection, collaboration, plural understanding began to erode. Well, that was until we had a global pandemic of COVID-19. That pandemic made us realize that this whole idea that the global doesn't exist, it doesn't count, it doesn't affect us, suddenly we realize that we are in this together. This pandemic has affected practically all countries. We're talking about 197 countries. It has affected more than 115 million people. Has killed 20 I believe 25 million people, the last numbers of today by Johns Hopkins University. In the United States alone, 500,000 people died, and 25 million people infected with coronavirus. And I could ask each one of your contexts, your countries, your villages, your cities, your schools, your families, and we can see we are in this together. This affects us all. This is global in that initial sense that I mentioned before. So here's the question. That's why I changed my title. Now, is it possible to talk about universal global values, international cooperation, human rights, and even global education as cosmopolitan values and perspectives that can guide us in a post-pandemic world? That's the name of our series, right? We're thinking towards the future. We want to prepare for a post-pandemic world. Would cosmopolitan values help us? I believe it could. So let me start by defining, helping you understand the meaning of cosmopolitan, the way I understand it. What is cosmopolitanism? It could go back a long way in what I call a metaphysical religious perspective, going back to the ancient Greeks. Diogenes the Cynic said, "Cosmos polites." I'm a citizen of the universe. I should be well received. I should be respected anywhere, not only in the world, but in the universe. And this then later affected many other religions and groups that always had this dualism, including some people believing that, for example, in different religions, that, you know, I'm a member of this universe because I'm made in the image of God. St. Augustine mentioned, we are citizens of two worlds, the real world here on earth, and then we belong to a much bigger universal world that is the city of God, as he famously described in a famous book. But then later in modern times, we have a different understanding of cosmopolitanism that I call the epistemic form of cosmopolitanism, because now it has to do with citizenship in the legal, political, economic sense of this term. And then when nation states began to emerge in different parts of the world, we kind of started to understand citizenship as a national citizenship. And some people say, no, it is possible to think about us as citizens of the world, which means us being respected, us having rights, us having the possibilities of moving in and out of different contexts, of us participating in places beyond our places of origin. As a matter of fact, today through Zoom, we're doing exactly that. We're connected to different parts of the world. And that was the idea of the epistemic form of cosmopolitanism. Opening borders and allowing people to move in a certain way. Many of us do that. We move for tourism. We do this in terms of trade. We do this for education. We do this for political reasons, and so on. But let me wait a little bit here and go into a little more detail, because I want to mention that today we now have a variety of cosmopolitanisms that we can define. Before I get to this communication thesis, we have a variety of cosmopolitanisms. Some people talk about political cosmopolitanism, which means I could be part of different political contexts. Economical cosmopolitanism, in a certain way, some people claim that in the capitalist society, I could not only send financial resources and receive financial resources from different places, but I can be participating in an economic global transaction or series of transactions. Also, cultural cosmopolitanism does not necessarily mean that we all drink Coca-Cola or that we all eat rice, but that we are participating in coming in and out from different communities and being respected, being understood, and being received with hospitality, as well as environmental cosmopolitanism. As I mentioned today, with climate change and many other things, we realize that something that happens in this part of the world has an effect right here. Fukushima in Japan happened here, and we saw the impact in different places. We saw this past weeks in the United States this huge winter storm. They even call this Snowmageddon, playing with the theological term Armageddon, the end of the world, and the big battle that described in Revelations. And but what we realize that people from different parts of the world express their solidarity with the people, especially from Texas and different parts of the United States, that were suffering under this terrible environmental catastrophe. But for me, the most important thing is the idea of a moral or ethical cosmopolitanism. So with this, I'm now transitioning. Let me remind you where we are. I started with some problems in saying, no, we have a lot of issues today, and some people question our emphasis on global work, on global education, on global solidarity. And in many countries, we start seeing a certain form of nationalism. We saw this in Russia, in the United States, in India, in Brazil, in England, and many other places. Japan, I could say also. And then suddenly the pandemic reminds us, wait a minute, we're in this together. We cannot do it without us. And if someone is sick right here, as long as someone is still infected, the whole world is not safe. So we need to go back and think in terms of the whole world. What is that? That's the term cosmopolitanism, being citizens of the universe and participating in the whole plethora of affairs that affect us, as we mentioned before, morally, politically, economically, legally, culturally, as well as environmentally. Now, let me go to the communicative point of this. I follow in my understanding of cosmopolitanism, Dr. Pack mentioned my studies with Jürgen Habermas, and he followed a particular German philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who was the one who came up with that epistemic thesis I was talking about. He developed the idea that if we are supposed to have world peace, we need to have a cosmopolitan attitude. And what is this cosmopolitan attitude for Kant? We need to give citizenship and understand each and every person as a citizen of the world. What does that mean? Is that each person will be respected anywhere. If I'm a citizen of Brazil and I go to the United States, I deserve to be respected. If I'm a citizen of Japan and I go to China, I deserve to be respected. If I'm a citizen of India and I go to Germany, that will not alter the respect that I should receive, the value, my worth, and my dignity. All this I carry with me wherever I go. So we cannot anymore say, you're an outsider, you're an immigrant, you're poor, you're from a different gender, you're a woman, you're a child. We all have rights that need to be respected. That's what I mean by a critical cosmopolitanism that was coined first by Immanuel Kant. However, Jürgen Habermas, who was this student, not of Kant, because Kant passed away 250 years ago, or 220 years ago almost, but continued that tradition in German philosophy. Jürgen Habermas proposes that, yes, we can do this, but in order to make this happen, we need to emphasize communication. So he published a book, The Theory of Communicative Action, where he explained that those several points that I mentioned before, the idea of a moral world, the idea of culture, the idea of politics, legal frameworks, all these elements depend on communication. You cannot, for example, in religion, what is religion? I'm communicating either with God or the priest, the pastor, is communicating with me. We cannot have religion or theology without communication. That's one of the points that Habermas stresses. We cannot have law without communication. We cannot have economy without communication. Can you sell anything without communicating? I'm not saying just talking or just seeing or just listening. We have different ways of communicating, as I'm doing here right now. Is it impossible to do trade without communication? So Habermas shows and proves this point that communication is fundamental, is the basis of our society, and it affects not just one nation or one particular group, it is fundamental, it is universal. We all communicate. You could ask me, no, what about children? They don't speak. The mother knows when the child, the baby, is hungry. The baby communicates when the baby is in pain. One of the first things a baby does when a baby is born is to communicate, I'm alive. We're all expecting that cry to say, yes, I'm alive. Welcome to the world. We all communicate, and that's the fundamental element that we learn from Jürgen Habermas. So he does a little update on this idea of cosmopolitanism. It's not only a critical cosmopolitanism, but it is also an ethical communicative cosmopolitanism, a cosmopolitan idea of global values that has to be embedded in ethics and communication. This is very important because the ethics controls or adapts in a certain way, provides a framework for communication. Communication is not simply me talking without listening. Communication needs to be ethical. What does that mean? That I say, I listen, you participate. It means common participation in the endeavors of our society, not only at the local level, but also at the global level. Do I have anything to say about climate change? This affects us all. So yes, we all have a chance and a duty, a need to participate in conversations about climate change. Do you have any right to participate in conversations and discussions about the vaccination process against COVID-19? Yes, you have the right to participate in this process. Do we have a right to be involved in conversations about the meaning of education in a post-pandemic world? Yes, most definitely. That's why you're here. That's why we're in interaction in this moment, because if you are affected by it, if you are part of it, you have an ethical commitment and you have a moral duty to be part of the conversation, to be part of the communication. So that's the meaning of moral, ethical, critical cosmopolitanism. And that's one thing that I have been doing. Here's some of the books that I have written on this subject, and that's what I mean in the title of this talk when I say cosmopolitan perspective. We're all in this together. However, let me go back to one point, and I'll stop sharing because this part I didn't have the opportunity to finish the slides, but I want to share with you some thoughts on how this relates to the global pandemic that we are trying to address. Let me first ask, am I okay with time? Dr. Pack, Dr. Miranda, are we all okay?
Yes, we are okay.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic now and see how this connects to the issue of communication I'm trying to address, or I'm trying to present. Ethical communication is one of the key challenges in this global pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown that global issues are concrete and their impact are real. Now, how does this understand with the communicative understanding of a critical ethical cosmopolitanism? Let me start with a story. the whole idea of coronavirus is actually not new. Coronavirus were first identified in 1965 in studies developed by Tyrell and Bayon, who identified this virus as a new virus at the time, which they call B814. And they discovered that in medical students who had the flu. In 1966 and 1967, new studies found and confirmed this new virus. They found similarity. They found it not only in humans, but also in animals. And they, studying this through electron microscopy, they identified that they had some crowns. This virus had an interesting format, and therefore they were identified as corona, the Latin term for crown. In other words, we hadn't been informed before, but this has been around for more than 50 years. The other thing that we realized that it had an impact on animals, but it wasn't limited to animals. It was also transferred to humans and had a zoonotic impact. This virus was not only found in different species of rodents and cattle and pigs, but even in cats and dogs. And then later, some research identified that it was being transmitted to children, to humans. And as a matter of fact, we all carry it whenever we have flu. They identify this particular original virus, coronavirus, that was identified in the 1950s. However, in the year 2000 or after 2000, new types of viruses, coronaviruses, began to emerge. And we all remember, many of us, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, that arose in southern China and then spread quickly through Asia and the whole world in 2003, affected more than 29 countries in 8,000 cases, and many people died, about less than 1,000. But then we had the famous new coronavirus that happened in the United States, as a matter of fact. They found in New Hampshire. There was a new coronavirus in the Netherlands, a new coronavirus in Hong Kong. So this has been going on for the last 20 years. But then we also remember the avian flu, the bird flu, as well as the swine flu, other examples of epidemics that were emerging. But then in 2015, some researchers were doing some research in coronavirus in China, saying there's a possibility that bats could transmit the coronavirus that we don't understand yet, all that. And in this article is an article, the title is an article by Lee and Mendelsohn, published it took some time to be published in 2018, but it talks about human-animal interactions and potential for bat coronavirus overflow among rural residents in southern China. And they identified that people were not being educated, were not being communicated, were not being prepared and trained in order to understand that possibility. So this is 4 years before the pandemic. And they come, and I quote here what they say. The studies showed that animal markets could spread diseases related to coronavirus, and therefore we need to have readily adaptable measures that can be targeted to teach the populations at risk, including the use of gloves, use of masks, and other protection, especially when killing or slaughtering animals, and always washing your hands. We now hear about all that, but they're talking about this in 2015. So despite of all these warnings, we knew this was coming. We've been studying this for 50 years. This new wave of coronaviruses is going on for 20 years. Despite all that, despite all the warnings, the world seemed to have been taken by surprise at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, when after SARS and MERS and all this new coronavirus 2019 and COVID-19 was identified and also identifies the culprit, the responsible for this new disease, the new coronavirus 2019 disease, in short, COVID-19. But the important thing I want to tell you is how communication is related to that. So see, there were studies, but there was not communicated. There were reports of things that could happen, but we were not educated. There's a particular article by Sarah Davis. In the title of this article, I quote, "Reporting Disease Outbreaks in a World Without Digital Borders." And what she presents is that nation states, they're so nationalistic that they don't like to report what happens within their borders. Sounds familiar? And I quote her, she says, "States must communicate promptly with the World Health Organization and with each other about any outbreak events that may meet the criteria of a public health emergency of international interest," unquote. And she said there's a lot of international regulations for this to happen, guiding communication among countries, guiding reporting, guiding surveillance, and so on. But she also realized and showed in this article that most countries remain silenced about it, or silent about it. They don't share the information. They remain in denial. They don't inform their own people. They don't inform other countries. They do not provide information to the world. So what she shows in this article is that nation states regard those issues as an intrusion in their internal affairs, an intrusion in their nationalism, and therefore they prefer not to communicate. Well, this leads me back to the cosmopolitan perspective of communication and ethics. We have an obligation to communicate about these things. We have an obligation to share what we know. And this is nothing but an obligation to educate about those facts, those events, those cases. So Sarah Davis in this article, she shows that one of the things that is changing right now is that most of the information that we now know about COVID-19 was provided not by nation states, but by citizens, by informed people that using their own internet, I have one here as well, using their smartphones, their cell phones, their internet, they started taking pictures, sending information. Some other scientists here would pick up that information, analyze what they would receive. This sharing of information, this communication among people from different contexts, beyond their states, beyond their nationalities, was what actually changed the game in the fight against COVID-19. The United States denied it. China denied it. Brazil denied it. England denied it. Not surprisingly, Donald Trump was hospitalized. Jair Bolsonaro was hospitalized. Boris Johnson. They were not doing their duties. They were not being ethical. They were not communicating. So now you see the connection between the importance of communicating and how this is an ethical obligation for all of us. And communicating not only with my friend here, not only the people in my family, not only within my nation, but it has to be across borders. It has to be beyond our context. So with this, I get to the conclusion. For us, if we're talking about education in a post-pandemic world, we have to really prepare ourselves to avoid what just happened with all of us, with the world this past year. We need to really be involved in this communication across borders, in this education across borders, so that we can prepare for situations like this of a global pandemic, but we can also celebrate the good things that happen in our lives every day. As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization has published a book in 2016 that even tells, the title of the book is Guidance for Managing Ethical Issues in Infectious Disease Outbreaks. And I just want to read some of the things that they found out, especially after the Ebola crisis in 2014 in West Africa. Here's what they say. Governments have an obligation to communicate to the international community. They must involve the local community. They have to identify situations of particular vulnerability. They have to allocate resources for this. They have an obligation to invest in public health surveillance. They have to address issues of freedom of movement in an ethical way. They have obligations related to medical interventions for the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of infectious diseases. They need to promote research on those diseases, and they need to share data. And they need to also to provide long-term documentation of these practices, and they need to provide for the rights and obligations of first responders, healthcare workers, and those involved in these processes. And they need to pay attention to the ethical issues involving people moving from one place into another, international migrants, and so on. So in other words, what are the lessons learned with this? I conclude. These various issues that we've experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the way we see the scientific community, the World Health Organization responding, and many of us understanding, all this shows that the response to a pandemic such as COVID-19 and whatever happens in the future must be a matter of ethical concern, must be communicated, must involve democratic participation, and must be compatible with our framework in our religious, cultural, ethical, and legal frameworks, but relying always in good communication. So with this, I come to an end addressing that question I asked at the beginning. So is it possible to talk about education in a post-pandemic world? My simple answer, my attempt to present today was to say, I think we should adopt a cosmopolitan perspective that go beyond nation states, because we can't trust them, go beyond our local nationalities, don't deny citizens from participating, from learning, from getting involved in what is related in what affects them, and promotes a global education as a cosmopolitan ideal. If we have learned anything during this pandemic, we are now our task. It is our ethical obligation to educate people for a post-pandemic world. And for that, we need to provide education in the perspective of an ethical cosmopolitanism that avoids the problems we have seen today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Nascimento, for a very stimulating, engrossing, and thought-provoking message. And thank you also for fulfilling your duty to share with us and to educate us things that we did not even know about this COVID-19. And I'm sure a lot of people are now going to ask questions, as I can see from my chat box here. So let me turn over the floor to a member of the board of APAMEI and the head of the Biotechnology Department of Isabella Soborn College, Dr. Nirja Mati. Nirja?
Thank you. Thank you, President, for this opportunity. And first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to Dr. Nascimento for such a thought-provoking and engaging talk. And I'm reminded of that, like what he told about the cosmopolitan being the citizens of the universe, such beautiful thing. And then how we have made boundaries and how we need to break those boundaries, transcend those boundaries and become again one and feel, that we are the citizens of this cosmos, and we have the right to be respected everywhere and to treat everyone like one. So thank you, Dr. Nascimento. And also, like your, I mean, the talk flew, it started with such a thing that how the nations have developed around the places all across the globe where there were like around the rivers and valleys where the civilization developed, and then how there were boundaries, they crossed those boundaries, the cultures developed into nations like we are today, and how in the process we have learned so much. And also rightly said that even if in the process, like we face this pandemic, which again came to unite us, that even if we lose everything, we must not lose the lessons. So thank you, Dr. Nascimento. And I have one question in the chat box. It is from Alan Cabas. And dear friend, I think the idea of respect would be a great, good binding moral force in this pluralized world. In our tradition, we called it tahod, basically respect to life and creativity to every creature. It is a particular life base, but there is a universal significance of tahod. Thank you, Amos. So it is something that he is very much agreeing to what has been said, and he has communicated like this. And I also would like to welcome our participants to put their questions in the chat box. Meanwhile, I would like to just ask Dr. Nascimento to talk about, like we say, that even in the interpersonal relationships, the barriers are there. Why we fail to communicate. So at the level of the nations, if he can tell us, there are many things he told us, like why, like how the government should do, what are their obligations, but like what are the barriers according to his studies that make the nations not communicate ethically.
Well,
Dr.
thank you,
Nascimento.
Dr. Massi, for moderating this part. Thank you, Alan Cabas, for your comment and your point about tahod. I agree. And as a matter of fact, in many recent studies, many people are talking about the idea of, and I myself have been working on this project that connects me with you as well, Dr. Massi, as well as with Alan Cabas, which is the idea of environmental issues. And I define that as an environmental cosmopolitanism, which includes also this understanding that it is not limited to the rights of humans. It also includes nature, includes other animals, other species, includes, in your case, our life, bio, including plants and other beings that have rights to be respected as well. As a matter of fact, it is from India that we've learned the principle of ahimsa, that you respect and you don't exercise violence against even a plant. So that's something that we can learn, we have learned from India, that is become part of a universal vocabulary. And now tahod is also another important concept, and I would like to learn more about it because it is compatible with the idea of environmental cosmopolitanism. Now, to your point, Dr. Massi, yes, communication in this cosmopolitan value is an ideal, as I mentioned. Does it exist? Do we practice it every day perfectly? No. But it's a guidance, it's our star, our North Star. And based on that, we can criticize those who fail. We can criticize when we fail. So we could say, if this is the ideal, that we should be communicating in a way that is educational, that is fair, that is participatory, and so on, you can always point to me, hey, you're not doing this now. Or I can sometimes come to my own, I should have communicated better. Or I should have said this. So it is a critical value in that sense. It helps us to measure our success and to criticize our failures, and at the same time recognize when we're doing something good. Now, very quickly about the nation state's failure, it has to do, we have this idea that our rights, our values, even within nation states, depend on governments. But that's not correct. Actually, even the nation states and civilizations, they have emerged because people talk, people communicate. Let me give an example. Recently in the United States, there's a big discussion about anti-racism, the importance of avoiding discrimination, especially of young African Americans, Black people, who are being killed by the police. You know what made a big difference? When people went to the streets and start saying Black Lives Matter.
Right.
They said it once, no one heard. They said it again, no one heard. They've been saying it for years. So that sort of thing, communication is not just once and it's done. It is continuous communication, and that leads governments to respond. So that's how it works.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, here also I would like to add that, like we say that you spoke about ahimsa. So we we tell our children that all that ahimsa wouldn't have got us, India, the freedom from British colonialism, if it wasn't communicated to the rest of the world. It wasn't just the ahimsa or the lathi charge and just not doing anything, not retaliating. It didn't give us the freedom, because it went all across the globe. Other nations also felt for us. Other nations also, because it was effectively communicated, rightly communicated, ethically communicated by the media that time. So, this is the time to revisit that particular thing again, that if we are, using this media also as ethically, critically, it can do wonders today also.
And I see there's 3 new questions that have come in. Are you also able to see those, Dr. Nascimento?
Yes, now I can see that.
Yes,
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. So should I take those questions? This is from Ventura Emma, how will we determine the authenticity of information extensively spread in internets using personal phones, particularly on COVID issues, which are confusing? That's really, we all can relate to it. So Dr. Nascimento.
Maybe can I add, some more dimension, because, that was the exact question, I was trying to pose. And, as you know, the bigger problem right now is not just communication, but communication of the wrong information. There are lots of fake news and distorted, one. And so I think, we need to find out, what could be the critical dimension. That is what Habermas was talking all the time. So I think that we need to kind of develop certain system or, way to be critical within the communication. So I want to hear a little bit more, from Amos about this.
Thank you. Yes, those are very good questions, and I appreciate. Looks like people are paying attention. So we're communicating here. It is happening live, and that's the point. As I mentioned before, this is an ideal. Does it happen every day? No. Does it mean that we need to throw it away? No, because it gives us a model, and it is based on this model, on this ideal, that we can be critical. So, for example, some student could be saying right now, I want to ask a question, they're not letting me. Well, that's being critical. And that's being critical based on the same principle. We need to participate in communication. Some student or some of the participants asked, well, how can I identify good information from bad information, good education from bad education, as young Min Pak was mentioning, in a certain way, only by being engaged in the communication process. Maybe I read a new book, or maybe what I said, there's some misinformation there, or there's some wrong data, or even something false. Well, someone needs to come and say, hey, what you said is wrong. And that is part of the conversation. That's part of the communication process. So how can we be critical? We cannot allow the communication and the conversation to stop. If someone else comes saying, but I have a question, well, they have the right to participate in the conversation. And what is critical? Whenever we break that process, whenever we limit participation, whenever we silence someone, whenever we're not interested in what they want to say, whenever we limit participation, that needs to be criticized. There's another question talking about, what about the government? What if the government doesn't allow, doesn't provide me the information? That's why it's so important for us not to become state-centric, thinking that all the solutions, all the answers come from the state. Our societies are plural. We have educational systems, we have legal systems, we have political systems. The state is normally the head of the political system, but we have many other systems and many other forms of communication. And today with the internet, I know that the internet is not always free and is being monitored, is being censored in certain places. I also know that the internet is always with a lot of misinformation and disinformation. So we have to be careful. But how do we do this? Well, to looking for more information, to not believing the first thing we hear, but asking other people, hey, I heard this, what do you think? Is this correct? There was this lecturer, this professor saying that the coronavirus actually is old and was found and identified in 1965. Well, go check. Go talk to someone else. Go read a book. Talk to someone who comes from the area of epidemiology, and they'll be able to confirm if that was correct or not. So in other words, we need to, in order to be critical, in order to be ethical, we need to keep the conversation going and allow for more participation.
Thank you. We have yet another question. Like, it is from an anonymous attendee. And is the leader of a certain country has the power to implement this? Like,
as I mentioned before, we should not, of course, leaders have charisma, leaders are important, but what if they fail? What if they get sick? What if, so we cannot rely on just one person. That's why the communication is not limited to the leader, but it needs to involve multiple participants. And we have something to learn from different people, from our parents, from our sisters, from our brothers, from our siblings, from our friends, from our colleagues. So the more we engage in this process, the better we know about what's going on, the better we know about the future, the better educated we are.
Thank you. That was really a very kind of a tricky one, because, generally we have this tendency to think that if there was only one person who could do everything, it was a very good thing. So another question for you, Dr. Amos, from an anonymous attendee. Since some countries denied about the lack of communication to people about the coronavirus, how should a person approach them to give proper information, since it's an ethical obligation of the state and it's also for the safety of the citizens? What should we do? WCM student.
Very good, thank you. I alluded to that question before, but let me repeat very briefly. Well, it has to do with, normally the state responds to the pressures of society, internally and externally. In many countries, sometimes we alone from within a national state, we don't have much power. That's where the public opinion internationally has the power, I should say the communicative power, which is a term used by Hannah Arendt and also Jürgen Habermas, is not a power of the rifle, it's not a power of the of violence, it's the power of being compelling in your claims, being compelling in your stories, being prophetic in what you say. And that is not only unidirectional, it's not only in relation to the state, or to the heads of state, or to those who represent the state, be the police, be the other institutions, but it's also communication with those along us, sometimes even in other places. And as a matter of fact, what we're doing here today is an example. This is an international, what is happening today is what I had in mind when I say a critical, ethical, cosmopolitan education based on free communication. We're doing this right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I mean, you are like, to the young minds, you are answering them so well. They will be there to implement that in future, to comply with it. Now I have like, at this moment I have 2 more questions, but I will take a break and I will ask our president to say say a few words. So
Okay.
President,
Thank you, but I will not make use of this time. I would like to listen to someone who I think is also wanting to comment on this. Bishop Nakpil, wherever you are, please. Where's Bishop? Emmeline?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, po.
Yes, Bishop
First of all, I
Nakpil,
want
we
to
can hear.
thank Amos for such a wonderful presentation. I learned, I was communicated with, and I was educated. Thank you, Amos. But you know, this ethical obligation to communicate, and I now speak as a theologian, is grounded in the nature and activity of God. The God whom we worship as Christians is a God who reveals himself and so communicates himself. He communicates himself to be known in the way we humans may know, so that what we know of him, we may also communicate to others. God has been communicating through prophets, through people like Daniel in their dreams, in their visions, and of course he has communicated and revealed himself for knowing and proclaiming in Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ spoke in order that he may communicate his Father to those who heard him. Not only does God communicate, but he also prepares people to receive what he communicates. And that is the function of the Holy Spirit, who internally witnesses to our own spirits that God is our Father and we are his children. And when Paul spoke about speaking the truth in love, that is communication. That is ethical communication. That is theological communication. And I hope that the church, through the many schools that carry out the mandate to shape people so that people may become God's image, who will then reflect him in his reality in a world that does not know him, may indeed become images of God, communicatively, not just in language, not just in work, but in their lives. That is what I would like to say. This is not just an ethical issue, it is also a theological issue grounded in the love of God, who gives himself in communication to be known. God bless what we have learned today from Amos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Nakpil. As always, it's an inspiration to hear from you and to have your engagement and your participation in these processes, which is always educational for us, especially now at this point. Indeed, God communicates. As a matter of fact, creation was an act, a communicative action. We read in the Bible, God said, and there was whatever there was to be.
Yes.
There was light, and there was the universe, and there were the children of God made in God's image as well. So it is indeed true that communication is fundamental. Is the act of creation itself cannot be understood without us communicating. And even later, when we read in John that no, the Word was made flesh. So that again, we're being reminded that communication. So thank you very much for your contribution, which is indeed very inspired and on point. Thank you.
Sister Nisha, I think we have some more questions.
Yes, I will take on those questions. So one question that is, we are now in a dilemma. It is from Novrina Orji, that we are now in a dilemma regarding the latest issue on vaccination. How can we be sure that the right to be respected on the right to be safeguarded? Thank you. So it is some dilemma that person is. And
yes, thank you. Yes, and that's the biggest challenge we have right now. And we're already seeing many problems. Some celebrities are ahead in many countries. We've seen this. They, for whatever reason, not the most vulnerable, not the elderly, not even those who are
comorbid
more directly, are the ones that are the priority. But some people found a way of tricking the system and bypassing those whose needs are much higher. Or sometimes the very policies developed by the governments, someone has a great idea, but did not communicate with some other people who may have had a better idea and develop a better logistics, better criteria. So in a certain way, one of the things we realize, and this is part of my answer to the students, is that people, they come with ideas without having communicated with some other people. So those ideas are not good enough. And then we see the failure right there. What is our duty? To communicate that. I don't like that. I disagree with this idea. Now, of course, one person won't make much difference, but if you communicate with some other folks and together we react to those practices, there's much better chance that we can have any effect and can perform any change. But maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you say, no, it doesn't work. I'm not going to communicate. Well, I think that doesn't help either. So the best chance we have is actually to organize ourselves, and not just one person communicating, but from two we go to four, from 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 32, 64, and so forth. Because the more we communicate, the more people will participate in this process. Let me give an example. Some of you have probably heard the movement against sexual harassment, against violence against women in the United States, called Me Too. Maybe the first person who suffered that was thinking, oh, I am the problem. It happened to me. I made a mistake I shouldn't have done. Instead of seeing herself as a victim, this person was seeing herself as guilty of having been, provoking a male harassment, whatever, until this person communicated to someone else, what happened to me? I did this. You know what the person said? Me too. And then still, me too, became a global movement. So we have to communicate. Otherwise, it dies right there. So that's the idea.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yet another question. Gladys Elvia, greetings. I would just like to know whether we can go directly to your association to communicate with you when we have some informations that we want or need to clarify or validate, because nowadays fake news spreads like virus, and admittedly, Sometimes we have a hard time discriminating what news or information to believe in. Thank you in advance for your favorable response. I think this has been taken up, but still I will read the next question too, so that Dr. Nascimento can take on both of them together. How come that violence is still happening and respect is still not being done if there is already a lot of talks, seminars?
Very good questions. I'll start with the last one. I think we're not having enough seminars. It's a lot, but not enough. We need to have more. That's why we have violence, because we need to educate more people, need to involve more people need to participate. And if they do so, they are informed, they know, they have connections, and then people know, don't mess with me, because I know I can't communicate what happened to me. If I communicate, you're in trouble. So what we need is more communication, not less. So more talks, more seminars, maybe the forum here needs to happen every day. And it's hard to organize it, but it is a great initiative that needs to be emulated, needs to be done. Now, regarding the first question is related to that. Yes, how can we know that this communication we're receiving is trustful, is correct, is not misinformation or disinformation, so on? That's why the ethical component of communication is so important. And let me mention here, we didn't get into the technicalities, but communication is not necessarily me saying something. Communications, no, that's a lot of how TV works. They tell you something and don't ask what you think about it. Communication is symmetrical. Communications waits for the response. Communications wants to listen to you as well. Communication wants to involve you in the process. If that's not happened, that's not communication. That might be propagation. That might be dissemination. That might be broadcasting. We have different names for that. But communication requires this give and take, agree, disagree. Let's talk later. But here's the way to avoid disinformation, fake news, and so on. We are part of a network that can guarantee at least the commitment to ethical education. APAMEI, as the Asia Pacific Association of Methodist Education Institutions, congregates many schools, colleges, seminaries, and universities. And one thing I can guarantee you, if you are attending one of those schools, you're not getting fake news, misinformation, or bad education from any of them. I can guarantee you that they follow the ethical principles of our founder. They follow the ethical principles that Bishop Nachtel just shared with us so eloquently. And because of that, I don't know of any case, and I can put my hands on fire for that. No, I trust that no one if someone is doing that, there's probably going to be fired, because it's not compatible with the values. We teach with integrity. We teach with this ethical commitment in mind, and that's the first and most important thing that characterizes Methodist education. So if you're at one of our institutions, I wouldn't worry too much about it. By the way, keep communicating, because if you see something, let us know, because the communication is important here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amos. And now I would request Dr. Paul, one of our panelists, to say a few words. Dr. Paul, are you there?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, Connie has her hand up. Can we go to Connie? Because I'm going to say some closing remarks later. Let's have Connie talk.
Actually, I will, my apologies, because I have opened it in my mobile. So at a time, I can only see 4 people. So Connie, my apologies, please go ahead.
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much, Dr. Amos, for this very timely and very relevant topic. It's very relevant, and we in the Philippines could really relate much to what you are saying. So I think we really need to call for accountability, especially from our government officials. Indeed, we have an influx of information Yet the information could not be taken at its face value, as we have also an influx of miscommunication and disinformation. I think that ethical value is really a must. No, there must be an individual and collective accountability, especially when it comes to common good. And I would like to highlight the word communication, because communication is not only an imparting or exchanging of information and news. Communication leads to understanding. And when we say understanding, the word understanding means to stand under. When you stand under, you have the capacity to see the bottom of things and not the surface only. Hence, we could not be deceived because we have the capacity to see the root or the source of things and not the surface only. So in the communication process, we are looking at at all angles, no, from the bottom and the surface of things. Hence, we'll come to understanding, which is for the common good. I think that's just a simple thing.
Thank you.
Connie.
And I would like to say that this is exactly an example we're talking about. That communication is also this complementation. So I appreciate this point made by Dr. Connie Mella, because as part of the communication, each one of us bring a different perspective, and this concept of understanding is definitely fundamental. And I'll make sure I'll integrate this the next time I give this talk, because it is indeed important. This reminds me, Dr. Mella and Dr. Massi, that just to add to the students and other participants, in science and academic work in general, we have what we call peer review. So we actually, as part of the accountability, we never trust one person. It is a communication process built into science. If just one person, and this helps with fake news also, because if just one person says, I found this, we normally expect that a community of scientists, a community of theologians, a community of teachers verifies and confirms, and not just that, but also expands on that knowledge. So I think your contribution reminds me of that point. So thank you very much.
We have a couple of attendees with their hands up. Would it be okay if I let them to ask their question?
Sure.
Okay. I see here Lexia Xiang has her hand up, and I will. Okay, I think that you can speak now, and if you'd like, go ahead and say something. And then after that, Gregory, I can't see the last name now, has opportunity. Sepilo, Gregory Sepilo, either Gregory Sepilo or Lexia Xiang. Would you like to ask your question? You can now. We can hear you talking. If you'd like to ask your question, go ahead. But we can't hear from them. I can't hear them.
It seems like their microphone is muted, both of them.
Yes, your microphones are still muted. You need to unmute your microphone. While we're waiting,
in the meantime, Paul, may I just send my greetings to Professor Mab Huang, who also posted on the chat.
Yep.
It's a pleasure, Professor, and I'm honored to have your presence. If I could, actually it would be very important, because this relates to an issue that is so important to you, which is human rights. This whole topic I'm talking about is not comprehensible without adding the dimension of human rights. So I appreciate your participation in this community of communication, in your long-standing contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I was just, if I can take a minute. So I will just tell that the last commission that we have been given in the Bible, that also speaks that go and communicate to the whole world. Don't keep the good news to yourself. This information that you have for salvation, don't keep it to yourself. Just go and spread it. So I am just reminded of that by Dr. Amos' line that whatever information you have, you must not keep it to yourself. You have this obligation to tell it to others. So thank you.
I think we have one more in the chat box, Nirja. One more question. Can you check that one? Okay.
Can I ask? No, the question begins with, can I ask to stop communicating and when to start communicating? When to stop communicating and when to start communicating. It is an anonymous attendee. Yes. It's, I mean, to be or not to be.
Okay.
Actually, let me add a little bit more about it. I think because we are almost like concluding this time, but I wanna kind of give the little time, for Amos to respond about this one, about the fundamental discussion, between this German, critical theorist and also the French, postmodern. Okay, the discussion over here. So basic question is, can we really trust open critical communication based on the human rationality? So can we really build up if there is enough discussion, enough communication and critical thinking, and then we're gonna really find the best way possible for us, which can be ethical and also hope for the future. And that was the fundamental question from the French, the postmodern theorist. And that was why, they were kind of twisting the direction into, that's why, we cannot trust the human rationality because, there are a lot of danger and also creation of violence and other things. And that's why we need to go to more artistic, the emotion and nature and all other things. So yeah, I mean, I'm as an educator, I'm more for, the Habermas theory, and I really agree with you. But what could be your response, Amos, about this question?
Thank you, Dr. Pack, for this question, and also thank you, the participant, for the other question. Where do we start, right? When should we stop communicating, or when should? I think that is related to this question. Those two questions are connected. Here's one particular way of answering. If we do not communicate, if we don't say anything, then there's no meaning and there's no understanding, to use Dr. Kanimela's point. So, for example, let's suppose you go to a doctor and the doctor says or asks, "Are you in pain?" I think that would be a good point, a good moment to start communicating. Or let's suppose you're hungry and some people say, "Do you want to eat something?" Maybe for your survival, you better start communicating as well. Or if you're lost and they need any help, imagine if you don't communicate in any of those situations. So then you start realizing that communication is serious stuff. Is a condition for living, for being alive. Now, this leads me to Dr. Pack's question. Now, what is communication? I'm not going to get into linguistics here in communication theory and semiotics and many other disciplines that understand or talk about communication. But remember, I mentioned that even a baby, when a baby is born, this baby communicates to the whole world, "I'm alive." And how does that baby communicate "I'm alive"? Not by saying "I'm alive," but by crying. And that cry, that primordial way of communicating is well understood. And everybody's expecting that. Can you imagine a baby not doing anything? That's a good moment to start communicating as well. Now, but the thing is, it's not only rational, grammatically perfect statements. gestures count. That has meaning, and we can understand that. Or I just use my finger again, indexical indications. The direction's there, or I'm going this direction. All this is communication. If you see, I live in the state of Washington. In this past year, you probably saw we had fires in California, Oregon, and Washington. You know that where there is smoke, it means there is fire. So smoke communicates about fire. So nature communicates with us as well. If you see a bunch of birds leaving suddenly, well, maybe there's another animal coming. So nature communicates with us, people communicate with us, we communicate with, babies communicate. Let's suppose that I'm in a coma in a hospital. If you can imagine that. Can I communicate? There are ways of, through technology, seeing that my heart is still beating, my brain is still operating. So even my body in that situation can communicate certain functions, some vital functions that inform the personnel, the people in the hospital, this person is still alive. So communication happens in different ways. And this then, Dr. Pak, to your point, I agree with your criticism. That is my criticism of Jürgen Habermas and Karl Otto Apel. There's more forms of communication than just rational arguments. All these other points I just mentioned, if you understand semiotical language and semiotical communication, for example, I communicate with my dog. I have a dog called Dexter, and we communicate. And but here's the thing: a certain level of rationality is still necessary, because in your very question, you were being rational about the need for not being so rational. Understand what I mean? So it is a contradiction to ask a rational question defending irrationality. It is possible, but I have to be very careful because, for example, we have to speak in certain ways. We have to make sense. If you had spoken to me in Korean, I would not have understood. So there's a lot of rational choices that we make in our communication. Otherwise, we would not be understood. And most important, last thing I'm going to say, we all raise a claim to be rational. In other words, a claim that what we're saying, what we're trying to communicate makes sense. So in that sense, I would still be strong Habermasian and Appelian, but I'll go with you and Lyotard and Derrida and many of the French post-structuralists, Foucault, that there's more to communication than just that spoken language. And there's more to communication than just human communication. We can actually interact with many other, and I would definitely go in the direction that Bishop Nakpil indicated today. There are other forms of transcendental communication as well that some of us, under certain circumstances and under, with the preparation, we can hear, we can understand voices that know the voice of God, the Holy Spirit, and so on. Thank you.
May I add something to what you have just said, Amos? And I'm sure it is part of your thinking, namely the importance of interpretation in communication. You know, the Germans have made a lot about hermeneutics.
Exactly, yes.
And I think that is also very important in ordinary communication. We have to interpret, to clarify, in order that what we are communicating may be understood. Not just facts, not just knowledge, but meanings.
Exactly.
important in communication.
Thank you, Bishop.
Okay.
Exactly.
So thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Amos. Thank you, Nirja. And I think knowing when to stop is now a must. So let me call on the Vice Chancellor of Auyam Queen University and a member of the Board of APAMEI to give us his closing remarks and announcements.
All right. Well, let me start by saying thank you so much. This has been such an interesting presentation and dialogue. Thank you so much, Dr. Nascimento. This has been really very interesting for me personally and for all of us. And I really appreciate that we have been able to have this dialogue. It's been a dialogue about dialogue. And it's really made me think about Cosmopolitan. You know, I'm used to calling a city or a place cosmopolitan if there's people of various ethnic and cultural and religious backgrounds. If they live together and interact with each other, then we call it cosmopolitan. But today you have shown us a deeper meaning of cosmopolitan, the idea that all human beings are or should be members of a single community, and the ethics that come from that. You know, I'm reminded again that the very word itself, cosmopolitan, from ancient Greek, means cosmos, the universe, and polites, the citizens of the world. You know, that's what we are talking about today. And I think that our community, APAMEI, is a cosmopolitan organization. We come from different cultures, different countries, different backgrounds, but we come together as people who share as one community. So we are cosmopolitan. And I would say that Methodist education is cosmopolitan education. So I want to thank Dr. Nascimento so much for revealing that important truth to us today and reminding us what we are striving for as Methodist-related educational institutions. I want to finish up with a couple of announcements. To do that, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Let's see. Okay, I think you could probably see here. This is the APAMEI website. You can access it by typing apamei.org in your browser address, and it will take you right here. And we have lots of different announcements here. First off, the top one here is an announcement that I think is especially relevant for students. The GRASP Scholarship for International Students. If you click that, it'll open up here to this short announcement. These are scholarships for international students. The deadline for this year's application is March 1st, and there's a link here. You can learn lots more information about it. If you're interested, I encourage you to take a look at that. And then our upcoming events. And here we have a link about our upcoming forums. So in March, the theme is going to be climate change and sustainable development. In April, it's going to be health and nutrition. And we have planned through May. And you can see all the dates here. They come on the 4th Saturday of every month at this time. And I would encourage everyone to please come and join us again for another dialogue like this. In addition to these announcements, I also want to mention a couple more. We will be celebrating our first publication, The Secularity of God, by our very own Bishop Nakpil. He'll be publishing his book, and APAMEI, I think, will be helping with that as publisher of that. Thanks to our president, Dr. Miranda, who's been working behind the scenes to help with this. And we are also working to start our own academic journal on Methodist education from the Asia Pacific region. So please look for announcements for that on our website coming up in the future. And that's all for my closing remarks and announcements. And I will turn it back to Dr. Miranda to announce for our closing prayer. You're muted.
Unmute.
Unmute.
Can we give Dr. Nascimento a round of applause? I cannot thank him enough for this session this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Very inspiring, engaging, and empowering, especially for us Asians who refuse to talk. Okay, so thank you so much. This is a blessed moment, and I would like us to be blessed again with a closing prayer by our very own Bishop Emeritus Axial.
All right, let us pray then. Our Father, we praise you for the blessing we have received in this forum. We thank you for the presentation of Amos. We thank you for the response of so many to this presentation, which we so appreciate and value. We thank you for the leadership of APAMEI and the member schools. May you, Lord, continue to bless them and enable them to do the work that you have given them as a share in your effort to make people like you in your own image, so that there shall be a living witness to your reality in a world that does not know you. Our Father, in your Son Jesus Christ, through your Spirit, we celebrate our relationship with you for the glory of your name and for the good that you want to spread to make life abundant in this world. We ask this in Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you
you
so
all
much.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. See you March 27, right?
Yes.
Right. Our next
And
one.
happy birthday,
Okay.
belated Bishop. Happy birthday.
Thank you all. It was a great
Thank
pleasure
you. Thank
came
you.
to
Thank you.
participate. Thank you, Bishop. Thank you,
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Young
And
Min.
Connie. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Dr.
I
Nascimento, for hearing you.
Kimberly, thank you, Kimberly. Thank you.
And for the 200 students and other people, students and
Yes.
faculty and staff and everyone who came to listen, thank you all. Thank you all
Thank
for
you all.
Thank you
joining us.
all. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Yeah, thank you,
It
everyone.
was good to be
Dr.
with you.
Connie, so and bye.
Bye.